Welcome back. So we were just discussing about the Rostov stages. Okay. So this notion of, no centralized political system is important. Again, these were small communities. There's no organized state. There is, of course, some sort of a law, but they're mostly informal. So those institutions are informal. There's high dependence on cultural values and norms and practices in these societies. And then, as you'll understand, you know this from history of civilization classes or other classes. Transition to agriculture was important for the development of states, right? Now in stage 2, it is called the preconditions for the takeoff, okay? And most obviously, it is an agricultural society. Because again, to accumulate stuff, to start accumulating stuff, you need to settle down, okay? You stop migrating. And of course, agriculture is the main determinant of this. Now, how can human societies transited from hunting, gathering to agriculture? So this is a technological revolution, right? Because for thousands and thousands of years, these human societies interacted with nature by hunting animals and by basically gathering plants. Okay? Those are wild animals and those were wild plants. But there is some sort of knowledge accumulation in these societies as well. So if you interact with animals and plants for several thousand years, eventually you basically transmit enough knowledge from one generation to the other about these animals and about these plants. So that helped, and of course there are geographical reasons. There's a nice book which is called Guns, Germs, and Steel by Jared Diamond. So that book puts heavy emphasis on the geographical differences. So there are other differences, technological differences about knowledge and accumulation of knowledge and cultural practices, etc. But eventually that type of useful knowledge was applied to domesticate animals and to domesticate plants. That of course create agricultural technology. And human societies settled down, they established states. And in that episode, now you can accumulate stuff. You can interact with now materials. You can start building homes. You can start building other stuff. Okay? So this is then a technologically more diverse society. Again, interaction with materials are important here, is important here. So we have some sort of technological change and some sort of technological diffusion in that society. In one place you invent a particular machine, let's say plow, then other farmers basically adopt this technology. Now we also have increased individual and social mobility. Okay, because in the hunting gathering society, there is usually a leader, the old wise male member of the society, right? But then in agricultural societies, we understand the notion of class. Okay, now social dimensions of life are much more important in agricultural societies, because now the community is getting larger and larger. Why communities are getting larger and larger? Because of food. All right. Now you increase your with the agricultural revolution, you increase your production potential a lot. Okay, because at some point you start exploiting scale economies. Okay, conversely to the hunter-gatherers. Okay, because hunter-gatherer communities, they migrate to a place, they have natural resources there, they exploit those resources. In agricultural society, you become much more economic in making your decisions, because now you have the land, you have resources, you can increase the size of the field, the agricultural field, right? You can benefit from it. Then we have a larger surplus, obviously, and then division of this surplus becomes an important issue. We also see in agricultural society, of course, this is a very long episode, right? I mean, if you look at the length of the stage one, it is the longest. It has the longest length, right? You may imagine that. I mean, you may set the clock at like 200,000 years ago. Okay. Then for several 100,000 years, the human societies were hunter-gatherers. Then 10,000 years ago, around 10,000 years ago, there is transition to agriculture. So the stage of the agricultural society is much, much smaller. The length is much, much smaller than that of the hunter-gatherer society. Okay. Now, one thing we understand with the creation of modern state, obviously, and with the creation of borders, we understand that the development of national identity takes place. Okay, and it has taken, of course, a large amount of time as well, because, as you know, the idea of modern state or national interest was basically a modern European idea, but ethnicity, living together within a border. So those are the things that developed with the agricultural society in this precondition stage. Okay. So if you try to understand what are the conditions for the takeoff, first you have to settle down, because at the end of at the end of the day, at the end of the stage, you're gonna start producing industrial goods, right? You're gonna start creating factories. So first you have to settle down. That requires agricultural revolution. Then you have some sort of a state to create this identity of nation. All right, but then we also have social classes. Okay, peasants, lords, the king, right? The religion class, etc., etc. And you need surplus. You need people. If you remember from your economic history classes, if you remember the stage where the society, the feudal society basically dissolved, we are talking about that type of transition here. Okay. And the takeoff, the stage 3. In the takeoff, we see a couple of different processes. One is urbanization. The other is industrialization. The other is technological breakthroughs. And the other is, of course, sustained growth of living standards. So that growth is now initiated. Okay. And if you want a historical counterpart for this stage, you may think industrial revolution. Okay. So let's look at, again, the knowledge and technology side. So as an agricultural society, you are interacting with animals and plants. Now you domesticated them, so you can control the production of these resources. Okay, you are still dependent on land, but in the meantime, you are settling down. You have cities, you have towns, you have villages, right? Now, in that type of society, your interaction with the world is different than those with hunter-gatherers. So you interact with materials and you start understanding the nature of materials, the nature of coal, the nature of water, the nature of air, the nature of wood, okay? All of these things, the nature of bones, for instance, right? Because if you hunt animals, then you of course eat the meat, and since you are a hunter-gatherer, you are nomadic, so you leave the bones there. But if you settle down, maybe those bones will help you in producing some stuff. Okay? Maybe you're going to produce some jewelry out of the ivories. Okay? So that creates then an epistemic effect. Okay? The epistemic bases enlarge in time. Eventually, there is Newton. Eventually, there is Copernicus. Eventually, there is Galileo. Okay? So that type of transition mattered then. And if you have useful knowledge applied for the exploitation of, for the manipulation of nature, then you have Industrial Revolution. You understand metallurgy, you understand the role of factory, you understand how to spin a cotton fiber. Okay, so if you understand steam, okay, you basically start manipulating energy. All right. Now again, agricultural revolution is something like that as well. But in terms of productivity increases, and in terms of the outcomes, industrial revolution is much more significant. Okay, because with industrial revolution, your dependence to natural resources is no longer so strict. Okay, because you eventually start creating services, not just producing commodities, but you start producing services, right? So that type of society is very different than the agricultural society then. All right. So we have industrialization. We are starting producing many different commodities, many different goods, many different services. Okay. So inventions are here two types. You can invent new investment goods, such as the steam engine, or you can invent new types of shoes. You can invent new types of watches. You can invent new types of pens. Eventually, you invented new types of smartphones, etc. Okay, so there are both process innovations that you use in the production part, and there are also product innovations. So process innovations make your production processes more productive. Product innovations serve consumers with higher selectivity, higher selection of goods. Okay. So technological breakthroughs strongly associated with industrialization, and industrialization is of course strongly associated with urbanization, because now the old ancient regime, the feudal regime, where social classes are strictly determined, peasants are working in agriculture, lords are benefiting from the land rents, king is basically up there as the largest lord. Now that is dissolving into modernity. Okay, so that creates a push effect in agriculture. decreasing agricultural productivity with increasing population now allows workers to migrate to cities. Why? Because, so again, there's a push effect from agriculture, and then there's a pull effect from cities. Okay, so cities are attracting more people because they can be industrial workers. Okay, now at the end of this process, in the West at least, first in the West, first in England, then in for instance France, in US, then in Germany, etc. After some point in Japan, we see that type of modernity, and then we also see in the statistics that incomes grew, real output per capita exhibited some growth, and in these societies, we understand that that type of growth was actually sustained. Okay, in the last 200 years, we saw that type of sustainability. Okay, of course, there's this other types of sustainability that is about environment, but at least growth was sustained. So, you know, England did not become poor enough. Okay, Germany did not become really agricultural again, right? So that transition with that associated with this takeoff was a permanent transition. Okay, permanent transition into something else. So in that regard, it was different than the Malthusian cycle. Maybe first it looked like a Malthusian cycle because there is this booming GDP, but then we realized these societies that become industrialized, they can sustain higher living standards with increasing population. Okay, so if I want to go back to my figure, so we had something like this. Okay, we had something like this. Now, what do you expect? At some point, you expect this, right? No, it didn't happen. It went like that, and population also grew. Okay, so in that regard, this was a new stage. Okay, because both incomes and population kept growing. Okay, in the meantime, of course, urbanization increased, right? Urbanization increased, so this is time. So share of industry increased as well. Okay, and other things we discussed, right? Fertility, for instance. What happened to fertility? It goes like that. Okay, so that type is agricultural society that is transitioning to the modern society, the takeoff. Okay. So there is this fourth stage, the drive to maturity. Now, in the early stages of the Industrial Revolution, of course, you are still producing a smaller and narrower set of products, both in terms of consumption goods and in terms of investment goods. Okay? The drive to maturity means you increase the scale and you increase the set of the goods. Okay? You produce many different types of goods, many different types of consumption goods, many different types of investment goods. Okay, so if you compare the number of products the English economy produced in, let's say, 19th century with the goods that this economy produced in 20th century, there is a huge difference. So in that sense, there's a commercial revolution as well. Okay, it is sometimes called commercial revolution. And why it mattered? Because again, if I share my whiteboard, I can maybe explain. So usually you see this as a utility function, right? So there are two goods. Then there is, of course, a budget constraint, right? Remember this? Then there's income, obviously. So you maximize this by choosing C1 and C2. Now, in other context, we write something like this. So utility depends on many goods, okay? And those goods are substitutes or complements, okay? So there is this raw parameter which takes values between minus infinity and plus 1. And n, of course, is the number of consumption goods. Okay? Now, this is the static view, right? There's no time here. So if you introduce time, okay, now NT becomes the number of consumption goods produced in period T, right? Then you may imagine entrepreneurship, okay? You may imagine in time, because of some factors, let's just call it inventive activity, okay, you start creating new consumer goods. New firms produce these consumption goods. Then, even if, look at this utility function now, even if you produce the same amount for each good, if you increase n, your utility increases. Okay? So there is this type of, so we usually call this law of variety effect. Okay? So usually we understand if your menu option, if the menu of options increases, if it gets enlarged, then you benefit more. You obtain higher levels of utility. Okay. I think Kiminori Matsuyama has a nice paper about this. Commercial revolution. Okay. So let me now go my slides again. Okay. Another particular aspect of the drive to maturity stage, the stage 4, we have a shift from investment to consumption goods. Okay. So you may actually imagine a production possibility frontier here. Remember that from Econ 101? On one side, on one axis, you have one type of good. On the other axis, you have another type of good. Now, in time, modern society, so of course, you need to understand this. With industrialization, you need machines, right? For industrialization, you need machines. So to produce simple consumption goods, now with the factory system, you want to benefit from mechanization. So you invest largely on investment goods. You create factories, you create different types of machines that you will use in producing small consumption goods. Okay? But then, eventually, what matters is the consumer welfare, right? So you want to serve your consumers. As an economy, your welfare increases if your consumer welfare increases, okay? So drive to maturity, according to Rostov, should feature the shift of resources, the shift of investment from investment goods to consumer goods. Okay, for instance, instead of creating more machines that are that are used to produce, let's say that are used to produce in mining, now you should invest more in creating new types of baby biscuits. Okay, new types of shirts. All right, so in a society like this, in a modernizing society like this, consumer goods should have some priority. All right, because you start first in making your production process mechanical. Then you shift some of the resources to consumer goods to better serve consumer demand in different dimensions, in different aspects. Okay, it could be clothing, it could be health-related issues, education-related issues. For instance, you want to serve your consumers by producing better notebooks, better pens. All right, so the issue is not always about productivity. The issue is also about the menu of options from which your consumer chooses. Okay. Then another issue is investment in social infrastructure. When you create cities, when you create urban centers where factories are also located, so production centers are close by, you need infrastructure. You need roads, buildings, etc. But then you also need to do it in a social point, from a social point of view, from a social perspective. Okay. So you need to create urban synergies. Places for public gathering. Some regions or sections of society, some districts where cultural and artistic and sports-based activities take place. Okay, so you invest in communications, you invest in transportation, you invest in clean water, clean health, etc. So drive to maturity means imagine a particular Nordic country in the 21st century. So those are so imagine the public services in Stockholm, for instance, or in Oslo. So usually those societies are societies where the standard of living is really high. So social infrastructure and physical infrastructure is good. So if you imagine such societies with all the telecommunications network, all the transportation network, roads and bridges, and social spheres that increase again people's welfare, so that type of switch should also occur. So these countries that that are close to being a mature, developed economy, they must invest in these resources, in these dimensions of life as well. Okay, and then there's of course one hatch here, one problem here. Infrastructure gets old. All right, so you have to reinvest, you have to repair, you have to take care of depreciation. All right, if new roads are necessary, you have to do it. If new bridges are necessary, you have to do it. If new public spheres, cultural and artistic centers are necessary, you need to invest that. Telecommunications are important. In US, when I was in US, the telecommunication structure in some part of the city was really old, right? Because US was a technological leader in that arena, right? So for this reason, some of the infrastructure was old. Then there's always reconstruction. Okay. So there is that as well. But from a demand side perspective, it's a nice thing. But from a supply side, there's a constraint. Okay. Now the final stage is the stage of mass consumption, as we discussed. All right. Now at this stage, the society is now an urban society. The share of agriculture is close to zero, both in terms of labor and in terms of GDP. Okay. This one is important. Disposable incomes are stable. Okay, so people in these mass consumption societies, they have stable disposable incomes. All right, so they are not poor, but also they have some sort of income security. All right, either they have jobs, or even if they lose their jobs, the state is there, unemployment insurance is there, so they have stable disposable incomes. And finally, growth continues. Okay, so in these societies, how can growth continue? Well, you're going to see in the growth theory part in the next semester, you're going to see every single detail about such processes, but basically, you either have capital accumulation, and most importantly, you have knowledge accumulation. All right, you have technological progress, you have innovations, you have technology adoption, and your production processes become increasingly more productive. The set of consumer goods in the economy is always increasing. New services, new commodities are constantly introduced by entrepreneurs and inventors to serve the human needs, or as some people argue, to create new human needs. Okay, but those are the properties of age of mass consumption. So everybody have stable disposable income, either through employment or through income security such as unemployment insurance. So they have access to a set of goods that they would like, so they purchase them, and then they enjoy consuming these commodities and services. Okay. In the long run, what creates that type of stability is, of course, becoming more productive. Becoming more productive how? Becoming more productive by creating new technologies, new consumer goods, so basically innovation or technology adoption. And in that society, of course, agriculture cannot keep up with the industry and services, right? So the type of agricultural productivity also increases by mechanized agriculture, etc. But the share of labor in agriculture, the share of GDP produced by agriculture, occurring because of agricultural production, that decreases as a share. Okay, and if you actually compare the household budget's share, within a single household, the total amount of spending may increase. The total amount spending on food, for instance, may increase, but the share of food expenditure decreases. Okay, you can actually compare modern societies in that regard as well, which is called Engel's law, by the way. So in modern societies, when once economy starts getting richer and richer, the share of household budget spent on food decreases. Okay, so these are the 5 stages. Now we have about 2 minutes. I can take some questions here. Then we're gonna have another break, then we're gonna continue. I mean, as you see, let me add this comment here. So as you see, it is highly realistic, right? So those are the features that you can observe in modern society today. And of course, not every developed economy have all the most of the developed economies have all the features of the mass consumption society. Okay, but not all, because there is poverty as well. All right, so especially disposable incomes being stable, that's the important part in the age of mass consumption. Okay, not all high-income economies that have that type of stability. Okay, but we can discuss the criticism later on. So if you have questions or comments, we can discuss them right now.
I want to ask a question about the the theory includes only European countries.
Well,
but it's outdated nowadays because Eastern countries have developed. So is there any alteration in this theory?
Okay, yes. Mert, that's a very nice question, but I don't have time to answer it right now. We can do it after the break. So let's say 10:55, okay? Another 15 minutes, and 10:55, we're going to continue with Mert's question. All right? Okay, I'm ending this right now. 10:55, we are meeting.